Good morning. Thank you for joining us on our event around early childhood education. My name is Rebecca Winthrop. I'm a senior fellow and a director of the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank based out of Washington, D.C. And it is a real pleasure to be here today with some very esteemed guests. I'm very happy to welcome the Honorable Julia Gillard, who's the board chair of the Global Partnership for Education, also former Prime Minister of Australia. Once I was moderating an event. Julia has written a wonderful book called My Story, and I was moderating a book launch, and I introduced her as the first Prime Minister of Australia, which made her very old, which of course she was the first female Prime Minister of Australia. Sitting beside her is His Excellency Tariq Al-Gurg, the CEO of Dubai Cares, very, very engaged, obviously, in this event and many things around the world. Thank you for being here, Tariq. And then very, very happy to welcome Minister Nalacheko from Tanzania. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're incredibly busy, and she has to zip out along with a few others. So we will start late but end on time. And then finally, I'm very, very pleased also to welcome Michael Wamaya from Kenya, who is one of the top 10 Global Teacher Prize finalists. And I was telling him that some of us up here have been the judges for the top Global Teacher Prize. So now that we meet all 10 of the teachers in person, we feel like we know them and all their stories. So congratulations again, Michael, for all your incredible work, and thank you for being here. So the topic today is early childhood development. And clearly you're all here probably because you care about it or you're interested about it. And it is really one of the world's best investments in terms of returns on investment. If you invest in early childhood, you get a lot of bang for your buck later on in life. I was on a session yesterday with Arne Duncan, who was the former U.S. Secretary of Education, and he said, what we need to do is more early childhood. Professor James Heckman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, has told us, for every $1 invested in early childhood, you get $7 back later on in terms of improved health of kids, reduced prison time, improved achievement and job placement, and all sorts of things. And he said, I can tell you, rarely do you have such a good investment when you're thinking about where to put your government dollars. So with that, Julia, I'm very curious to turn to you to kick off the session. For the first time, really, we have a big focus on early childhood development in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is exciting. And I'm curious from your perspective, from the Global Partnership for Education perspective, but also perhaps from your past government perspective, what do you think are the key challenges and opportunities to really meet the SDG target on early childhood?
Sure. Thank you very much. I assume this is on. There's no lights or anything, but you look like you can hear me, so that's great. Rebecca, I think we should be celebrating the fact that for the first time, early childhood development and care is actually right there in the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. So that's a fantastic thing. And it really is, in terms of our development thinking, all of us catching up with the world's best research about how children brains develop and when are the most critical times to make sure that children are learning and are developing their cognitive capacities. So it's good to see that our development agenda now has early childhood right there. The challenge, of course, is one of implementation, and that's a very big challenge. And I think starting with the challenges and reflecting back on, decisions governments have to make, Often it's quite difficult to mobilise government around early childhood because it doesn't necessarily fit clearly in anybody's portfolio. Some governments put it associated with education, some governments put it associated with other social services, even health. And we do know that to make sure the quality is right and that early childhood care and development is really working, we need to bring expertise from several areas. I mean, it is about education, but it's about nutrition, it's about healthcare, it's about psychosocial development. So I think that there's that breadth challenge to be thinking about. And then for the many very poor countries in which GPE works, it does mean that we are once again confronted with a resourcing challenge. Many countries are still struggling hard to try and ensure that there is universal access to quality primary school education. They're lifting ambition to secondary school education. Now we're lifting ambition again to add early childhood education, and there's just this question of how do we make sure that resources are available, and that's a challenge for domestic resource mobilisation, but it's also a challenge generally for the global community. At GPE, we are engaged very much with this agenda. We've invested around $180 million in early childhood education in 30 partner countries, and we can see that that investment is making a difference. But we would clearly want to be in a position post our replenishment to be able to grow that investment and grow the number of countries that we're engaged in for early childhood development. So a lot to do, thinking about implementation and thinking about resource mobilisation.
Great, thanks. And I think that point about one of the big challenges of early childhood being multi-sectoral, so you need collaboration and coordination across a whole range of actors, is one we should probably return to later on in the discussion, because it is an ongoing conundrum. Tariq, what about you? What do you think can make the largest positive impact on improving early childhood development for young kids?
Well, Rebecca, I might be drilling down a bit more than what Julia mentioned about the brain of the child. So I'm going to talk a bit of science, although I'm not a scientist, and for the scientist people, please forgive me if I'm not going to tap into the exact words. But we always believed as an institution that to have a powerful early childhood development, it won't be achieved without children being ready for schools, schools ready for children, and then parents and community being ready to play their role in the community. So for the child to be ready for school, we have to understand how the child brain functions, how the brain is actually working. We have millions, if not billions, of neural connections happening in a child's brain. And if you can just imagine if a child has a thought or a memory, and each thought or memory will create a path for all these neurons to be moving, and then you have another thought and another path gets created. And once these two thoughts meet, these two paths will also meet in the brain. Those are physical paths we're talking about. And then that is called a neural connection. And with these neural connections, what's happening in a child's brain is we have 700 to 1,000 neural connections per second in a child's brain. This is how fast a child's brain is developing. The more information we give the child, the more his brain or her brain will develop. The less information we give the child, the less care and attention we give the child, the less the brain will develop, and that may cause different things. One of it is stunting, of course. Now, we are talking about brain power, brain development. This is from birth until the age of 3. That is the most crucial time. We're talking the first 1,000 days. But we also have to take care of the child. We have to give him the right attention, the right health, the right nutrition. So brain stimulation is also important. And once we get that cycle of having information with the right nutrition and health and care, then it is the schools which have to be ready for the child. And with schools, basically schools have to prepare the curriculum, the pre-primary education system. Teachers have to be trained to deliver upon this education, and also provide the learning environment to the child. And when we're talking about learning environment, we're talking about the child's physical, social, intellectual, and emotional development. So in a nutshell, we're talking about a proper cognitive stimulation to the brain, and that's when a child gets when the child gets prepared for the primary level. And the role of the community and the parents is basically to continue this path. We have given him health, care, attention, brain stimulation, cognitive stimulation. Then the parents and the community has to involve him into the entire spectrum of education and also involve them into all the activities that the community is working upon.
Great, thank you. Madam Minister, why don't you tell us a little bit about your country and how do you go about taking on this big challenge and teaching your youngest citizens?
Thank you very much. My country, Tanzania, also recognizes the importance of early childhood education as important for setting foundation for subsequent learning. And in that regard, we are doing a lot of things, and as the government, we are doing mainly what the colleague from Dubai Care has just said, to prepare schools, to prepare environment, and to prepare teachers for making sure that they are ready for early childhood education. And I can say that for the last 2 years, we have done significant achievement in terms of early childhood education. We have been able to develop curriculum because we used to provide, but mainly this was done by non-government organizations. But now the government has realized it's important to make it compulsory, because we only had the primary school, which was compulsory, but now even early childhood is becoming compulsory. So what we did, we reviewed our education and training policy in 2014, and in that education and training policy, it says specifically that early childhood is compulsory. And to start with, because he has set a very good ground for me to say what we are doing in Tanzania. So to start with, because you need to have learning environment, you have to have classrooms. So for each primary school, there is a pre-primary classroom for early childhood education. And also we have trained all the teachers who are doing pre-primary education, because we are starting to do it as a compulsory. So the challenge we are facing, we don't have sufficient teachers who are equipped or who are skilled enough to provide early childhood education. So what are we doing to solve that challenge? We have conducted short courses for teachers. And in fact, all the teachers who are teaching early childhood have gone through an orientation. But apart from that orientation to all the teachers, we have short courses, 3 to 1 year short courses, and we are continuing to provide such training for teachers who are in service. But for pre-service, now we have 35 government teacher training colleges, and out of these 35, we have selected 7 which will be specializing for early childhood education, and they have already started. So we have 7 teachers colleges which are meant to provide training in early childhood education. But for other colleges also, government and even private colleges, early childhood education is a compulsory subject for all the teachers, so that they are able to prepare the children in case they happen to be in schools where there are no trained teachers. So at least they should have ABC, though one subject is not enough, but at least it's better than nothing. So apart from specialized teachers, but still all the primary school teachers are also equipped with how to handle children in early childhood. And I'm very pleased that in my panel, I have Julia, who is a board member of GPE. We are receiving support from Global Partnership in Education to strengthen early childhood education, and also Dubai Cares through the Children in Crossfire NGO because we are doing this in collaboration with the non-governmental organization. So a lot has been done. And through global partnership in education, we have been able to provide, to print and provide it to schools, teaching and learning materials. And also we are creating reading corners to make learning more stimulating and more interactive, because, you know, for early years, the children, they need stimulating and environment which is motivating for them to learn. So we are doing that, and maybe because I'll have another round, I can speak later. So probably I should stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's really inspiring to see such commitment to this really important issue. Michael, I'd like to turn to you next, but just a warning for the audience that after Michael, I'll take a little break and come to you all if you have comments or examples or key questions. Then we'll do a second round with the panelists. Michael, you know, one of the things that I'd like to ask you about in terms of early childhood education in particular is the question around equity. And, you know, we do know that the early years make a huge difference in terms of setting kids on a trajectory that ultimately, you know, is not very successful versus setting kids on a trajectory that will make them successful. And you work in Kibera, which is in Kenya, and it's a really large slum, I think 700,000 people, which is larger than the entire city of Washington, D.C., where I live. And you do dance. You're a ballet dancer. You use dance as a vehicle for really reaching kids, empowering kids, helping them develop a whole range of capacities and competencies, which is very novel and innovative. What are a couple of things? What would be your top 3 things, for example, that we could do to help kids from the poorest communities really get on the right path?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you guys for coming. I am a dance teacher, as she said, and mainly I work with kids from the age of 5. And I just give you an example of what Kibera looks like for a child, so you can visual how it is. So a child wakes up, a child is like 3 years old, and she wakes up in the morning around 5 a.m. And being that she's having other older siblings, like 4 or 5, in one 10 by 10 room, she's forced to wake up. And because where they were sleeping is where they need to cook. So this child is 3, she didn't sleep enough because maybe the dad came home a bit late. And she wakes up, she needs to be part of the group because they are making breakfast. And she doesn't want to miss out on the breakfast. So she will be up and she will eat with this other group by around 6 a.m. in the morning. They will walk to school. She's still 3 or 4. And she will be forced to walk with them to school in the morning because sometimes it's a bit dangerous to walk by yourself at that time. So this child is still not able to visualize the surrounding around her. And going to school, she gets to see a lot of things. She gets to see maybe somebody was mugged. She gets to see somebody trying to set up a business or open up his kiosk. She gets to see somebody going to work. She gets to see maybe people fighting. So she sees a lot of information on her way to school. She gets to school, her class doesn't start until around 8 or 9. She's forced to just play around, and maybe she didn't get enough breakfast because the timing of eating was not perfect for her. So in a public school or in a community-based school, she is forced to wait for either porridge or lunch, which is going to be served around 1 a.m., around noon. So this child, her way of eating have been tampered with. So you don't expect her to perform well. So she didn't sleep well, she didn't eat well, and on top of it, she's being forced to read for exams and not read for fun. So gradually she grows with hatred to school. Gradually she finds like teachers are not people working towards her growth, but people trying to push her away. And these are really fundamental things that people tend to forget. So my key 3 things would be like, we focus on nutrition for these children. We focus on encouraging our preschools to at least, when you receive a child, try and understand the situation in which the child went through while coming to the school. So offer some sleeping time within school and offer materials to play with. I would say materials to play with, we always think like toys and things, but it's up to us as, or the governments to challenge our teachers towards creativity, whereby we don't necessarily need to have toys, but a teacher can also go to the garbage and pick plastic bottles and make something, and you have something for your children to play with. I've been so privileged to, while dancing, to also have traveled to Europe. And I used to see like school children, they don't get to read, they're just playing with toys. And I'm like, why are they playing? You know, why are you arranging boxes while you're supposed to read, you know? And it's something I completely forgot, that playing, sometimes organized playing, help a child to organize her own mind. This is where I place my bag. This is where my lunch is. This is how I sit. And those key things, we tend to forget them because we are focused a lot on short-term results, which we call exams. So to me, those are the key things we ought to change.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's turn to the audience. We'll take a couple of quick questions before we go back around. I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. The early birds get the worms, so we'll take those 4. And if you could be quite brief, please. And I think there is a... Here, take this. Yeah.
I address this to anybody who can help
tell
me.
us your
Thank you.
name.
I'm
Your name.
Meenakshi Sani. I'm heading the school in New Delhi. And I would be grateful to know if there are training centers, because I've heard of training centers for school and higher school education, but not anything for birth to 3 years. And I'm curious because it's my dream to set up a daycare center with very well-equipped people to take care of babies, based on what you just said about their neural connections in the brain development. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And we had a second one right here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ayla Göksel from Turkey. I've been working in the early childhood field for over 25 years now. And while I'm thrilled that we have this panel, I'm also a little bit disappointed. The reason being is that early childhood, the research that you alluded to, was done over 15, 20 years ago. The neuroscience, the economics, the equity arguments have been around for years. But for some reason, we're still failing to make early childhood. Okay, we're still failing to make early childhood one of the main events. So I've been to dozens of conferences like these, and it's there, but it's not a main event. So where is it that we're failing? Because all the science and economics we need are there. The funding is not coming though. I mean, I'm thrilled that the Global Partnership for Education has devoted 180 million, but that's less than 0.5% of your total allocation since 2003. And that's what the figures are for almost all the countries that we're talking about. So my question would be, and my challenge is, what are we not doing enough of? I'm also thrilled that it's there in the SDGs this year round, but it's actually a very, very narrow goal that we have there. And we know that's not enough. That doesn't cover the science that you refer to, because that happens in the earlier years. So I'm not going to take up more time. I just want to say one other thing. There is a movement going on now, which is fantastic, the Early Childhood Development Action Network that has been spearheaded by UNICEF, WHO, and the World Bank. Although it does have a focus on stunting, it's very, very encouraging. But do you know they're also struggling just to find funding from the Secretariat? Now, if we want to build a global movement and we can't get donors to even decide on funding a Secretariat for something like this, then there's something wrong. Final point.
Thank you.
No, I do want to make this. I'm so sorry. It's something that I'm very passionate about. We seem to also be talking about early child education and preschool education more than anything. Now, there is a lot going on, especially in what parents can do in low-cost, home-based programs. And there's research on that. So what can we do to ensure that they get a look in as much as the center-based, which is often the more expensive investments? Thank you.
Thank you. All very important points. There was one, I think it was this one right here.
Before we go on to the questions, I'd like to welcome the Honourable Minister from Nepal, who has actually been able to join us today.
Great.
And I'm just going to bring a seat up onto the stage.
Wonderful.
For him.
Please do come up. Thank you for being able to join us. Very good. All right, so I think there was a question here.
I'd just like to say that I agree with, Isla. I really do agree with her because I've just entered the early childhood education scene as well. And this was the only one specific thing that I could really relate to for that. And so my question is a little more centered around what she said in the end regarding families and being able to teach directly at home and things like that. So I've written it down. So children in early years, they need individual care. And sometimes it's the moms who can do that the best. So I'd like to know what the speakers would think about I'd like to know what the speakers would think about combating teacher shortages by setting up optional learning opportunities for new moms as soon as they're moms. So maybe that could help because they really feel the nurturing part of taking care of young children.
Thank you. Thank you. Bela?
Bela Jamil from Pakistan and the Education Commission. I mean, this is a delightful panel. I just wondered, because every time early childhood comes on the global scene, it somehow gets marginalized. What are the plans in the countries and amongst the agencies of supporting truly multi-sectoral, holistic early childhood development or early childhood care and development? Because that's where we keep on falling short for a long time. And this is a great opportunity because it's not just SDG 4.2, it is another 11 SDGs get impacted by early childhood, such is the value addition of early childhood.
Great, thank you, Bela. So hold, I saw quite a few other hands, and hold your questions, we'll come back around. So we have a lot of questions here. We have questions around training and support, particularly for home-based care. A couple of questions that I think are really important for people who've been in the early childhood community for a long time are very frustrated. You know, how can this still be on the margins of the global education agenda? You know, what can we do? A question about multi-sectoral, which Julia opened up with. How do we work better across all those sectors? And a question again about sort of galvanizing moms and home-based care and parents and communities. Minister Padel, thank you so much for joining us. We're very, very pleased to have you. We're most particularly pleased to have you because you have been a real champion in Nepal on early childhood education. So you've heard all the questions. Could we open up with you just telling us a little bit about, you know, what you're doing in Nepal and perhaps how you came to prioritize early childhood education, because that was a question from a number of people.
It's good.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank to participate this program to organizing committee. We have great priority to early childhood learning in Nepal. Last year, we have made a constitution which has mentioned the childhood development right is holistic right, holistic fundamental rights as well as constitutional rights also. This is the main cause to get priority to early childhood development in Nepal, as well as education, health, and holistic development of children. we had priority to early childhood development. There are some reasons. We are one of the country which has committed Dakar Declaration of Education for All. Among these 6 goals of the declaration, one of ECD. In the context of Nepal, there was the practical of pre-scholarship children's center in the institutions of school and community also. To have opportunity to preschool classes in the matter of child right in Nepal. We can also say that the children's psychology extreme children's care. So far as the impact of ECE in content, we have following status. The achievement of children of grade 1 is high if they have ECD experience. Readiness in schooling has increasing. Enrollments rate basically girls children has increased by prioritizing the ECD. There is possible impact in all rounds holistic development of children. The retention name of children with ECD experience in high. The research studies shows that the performance rate of children with ECD experience is high. This is the reason to give high priorities to ECD in Nepal. And next year, we have declared an international conference will held in Nepal about ECD. Thank you.
Great. We will all be there if you invite us. Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Julia, could we turn to you? I'd love to hear your insights from the Global Partnership for Education perspective. There was a particular comment saying, look, GPE doesn't give very much money to early childhood, and perhaps you could respond to that and tie into the question about how do you really get ECD on the global agenda in a more substantial way.
Sure. Thank you for that. And I can hear and also share the frustration that's in the room by people who have been in the early childhood development and care advocacy movement for a long period of time. I get it, why you would be frustrated. And I think the best answer I can give to that is why does everything take so long, is looking firstly at the level of a national government. I wish it was different, but the reality is most governments are not very agile creatures. And even if I look at my own country in Australia and we chart the journey as to how Australia ended up engaged fundamentally in early childhood education and development, the reality is we came off, like many nations like us, we came off a base where people would say families take care of kids, then they go to school. And then that started changing in the 70s and 80s as women moved more and more profoundly into the workforce. So people said, okay, families take care of kids, women work, we better have somewhere that minds the kids and we'll call that childcare, and then they go to school. And then this thing called childcare grew up in all sorts of organic ways, some of it non-government, but a lot of it in the for-profit sector. And then the research ends up getting popularised about children's brains. So people start thinking to themselves, well, we need to do better than this. Yes, there are kindergarten programs and early learning programs that are available, but they were a model that grew up when there were a lot of stay-at-home mums who could then drive their kids to a kindergarten for 4 hours of play-based learning and then drive them home. Now many of the women are working, so they put them in a childcare centre and they don't have the ability during the day to go and pick them up and to drive them to kindergarten, so those kids aren't getting the early learning. So you've got this hodgepodge of what's going on. And then at the government level, you've also got sort of many actors. I mean, in Australia, like many other nations, we have a national government, we have state governments, we have local governments. Historically, local governments funded kindergartens. The national government provided subsidies for the cost of childcare because it wanted women in the workforce. State governments ran state schools. Some of the schools had early learning programs. Some progressive governments had, poverty alleviation programs, which included parenting programs and parenting support for at-risk communities. So all of these actors everywhere. Then in governments, who's got the responsibility for early childhood? Well, maybe you'll add it on to the childcare minister. Maybe you'll tell the school minister to do a little bit more. Maybe you'll actually tell the social services minister who's doing the childcare payments to step up and do it. And all of that takes a lot of working out. And then finally, you get a government elected. The government I was Deputy Prime Minister for was elected in 2007 and says, you know what? We're going to embed early learning. It doesn't matter what setting children are cared for in, whether they're at home, whether they're in childcare, they're all going to have access to early learning programs. Disadvantaged families are going to have access to even deeper early learning programs, and you get a sort of sea change. And then, having announced the policy, you've got to get all of your federal ministers who have got a little hand in that pie all working together, and then you've got them to negotiate with all of their state counterparts and get all of the state counterparts that have got a little hand in to all work together, and it's complicated. If it's complicated in an environment like Australia, why would we think it's less complicated by the time you're in Tanzania or Nepal or anywhere else with, government structures that have got all of these difficulties? So yes, it's frustrating. One of the things we're trying to do, GPE in partnership with Dubai Cares and also with the Open Society Foundation, Hilton Foundation and Comic Relief, is we're trying to say, look, this quintessentially is a challenge about planning and doing something at scale. So what can we learn? We're calling it BELDS, the Better Early Learning and Development at Scale Initiative, BELDS, but it's effectively a deep dive into what would enable countries to crack this and crack it at scale, given all of these complexities. So none of that is meant to say don't be frustrated. Be as frustrated as hell and be, as a result of your frustration, very loud in the advocacy for early childhood, because that's how things change. But please don't get the impression that the pace of change is wholly explained by people being not motivated to change. Often people are very motivated to change, but it's actually still quite difficult to do and to achieve.
Well said.
Thank you. Tariq, picking up on that point, what about mobilizing real political will? What are some ideas, real political will to sort of accelerate that pace of change? What are some things we could do?
Look, there are many ways on how to mobilize political will, Rebecca. As you know, advocacy is one of them. It's very well effective. How we do it in Dubai Cares is not different, but we have kind of a cycle running into countries. And maybe answering your question also, there's a huge funding gap, and you're aware of the funding gap also. But you have to understand why there's a funding gap. Since the MDGs, not a lot of organizations or countries have supported education. As a matter of fact, today, for the past 5 years maybe, a movement has been started to support education. Education never got financial support from the world except for the last 5 years, thanks to Julia Gillard, thanks to Gordon Brown, thanks to Tony Lake, thanks to Irina Bokova. That movement has just started recently because the MDG2 hasn't met its target. Sorry, so coming back to you. So how we do it, Rebecca, is we go to governments, first of all, alongside with our implementing partners. We never impose a program to a government. We always propose. We listen to the government. We see what government needs, what their priorities are. We're talking about ECD here especially. So if a government needs support towards ECD, meaning ECD is not embedded within the curriculum, it's not part of the education system. So we have to test new models to see. Each country has a different issue when it comes to early childhood development. And once we find out what the government actually needs, we actually go back to the community and see the needs of the community. And each community, and I have traveled to Tanzania, I have traveled to Nepal, I just came from Laos. These three countries in specific, they have different needs and they have different issues. We have to understand what the community also needs. And once that is done, we actually conduct a research. So we have a baseline towards that research. And while the program is running, we continuously monitor and evaluate the program. We extract all the evidence, what works, what doesn't. We sometimes reshape the design of the program to make it work based on the context and the need of the program and how it has evolved. And once the midline or the end line, depending on the program, how long it is, ours are usually between 3 to 5 years. Once we extract all the evidence and reshape and redesign these programs, then we go back to the government and see how the program has been successful. And once it's successful, that is where political will comes in. We tell the government, fine, do you want to scale it up nationwide? The government most probably will come and say yes. So we will give them the research content, we will give them all the evidence, how this program has been functioning for the past 3 or 4 or 5 years. And we have to convince policymakers to embed this program within the education system, within the curriculum of the Ministry of Education. But also the government has to have an ownership of this program. They have to own it. It has to be part of their strategy, a part of their mandate. And then the government has to buy into it. If they're not going to put any money, any investment into this, that means they don't believe in it. So the government has to buy into it, and that's how Dubai Cares will come back again, at least for a phase 1 scale-up. So that's the national level political will. And then on the international level, we play a very close role with GPE, with the World Bank, with countries, with governments, so they can actually come as international donors and start scaling up this program together.
Okay, great, thanks. The catalyzing force of philanthropy. So, Minister, let's turn to you in Tanzania. I'm curious, Julia gave a very good outline of all the different groups and stakeholders and parts and pieces that makes up early childhood development. Could you talk a little bit about how you're tackling that multi-stakeholder coordination and collaboration? Give some concrete examples from Tanzania on how you address that.
First of all, I should also share the frustration that the audience are talking about, the slow pace of implementation of early childhood education in the countries. And Julia has explained it very well. And what I want to add, first of all, even for in my country, in some communities, they feel like a child of 3 to 5 years is still too young to be handed over to someone else to take care of the children. So even the parents themselves, they don't feel so much comfortable to entrust someone to look after their children when they are that young. So the complication, I'm adding another dimension of the community, also their belief and their perception. But generally, for example, in my country, the early childhood education used to be under the Ministry of Community Development and Children. It was not under the Ministry of Education, but of course there are challenges because that ministry is not competent enough to develop a curriculum, to prepare teachers, and so on. So currently, from 2015, when we started implementing our new education and training policy, the coordination is under my ministry. But of course, I'm working with the Ministry of Local Government because the early childhood cares are under the local government authorities. And also the Ministry of Health comes in because there are issues of health, issues of nutrition. So if these children are not getting, for example, vaccination in time, then their learning will not take place. So we are coordinating, and I can say, as the government, we just started doing it as compulsory from last year. So we are starting, and we are experiencing challenges, as I explained in my first round of presentation. First of all, shortage of teachers, and also even understanding of people. So we are still engaging the people in the community. We are engaging with the local government authorities to ensure that our way of thinking of early childhood education is the same way the implementers have that kind. So it's still consultative, and because we have just started to implement it as compulsory. We used to have early childhood education, but it was not compulsory. But as of last year, it's compulsory for all the children, and each primary school has an early childhood classroom. So we are hoping through the challenges that we are experiencing, then we maybe in future 2-3 years to come, we may be in a position to say, hey, this is the best way to go. So far, we are committed, and we are not going to retreat. We are just going forward, and despite the challenges that we are facing, but we feel there is a great reward, there is a great achievement for the children to go through the early childhood education. So maybe that's what I can say.
Thank
Rebecca,
you.
just, sorry for the interruption. The cycle that I have mentioned, this is exactly what we have done with Tanzania. We are working with them. It's a long-term strategy we have together, and the government will, and all the political will. This is exactly what we have built with the government, and it's ongoing, and the research component is going through the whole 4 to 5 years of phase.
Great. Do you want to say anything in response, or?
Yeah, actually, with Dubai Care, there's a lot of community engagement, parental involvement, and the parents are even involved in development of teaching and learning materials. So, like, for example, they can even make stories or come to the classroom to tell stories to the children, so that they don't feel, as I said, in some communities, especially in rural areas, there's that sense of belongingness to the family, like they feel they don't want to be detached. So to make the parents understand what is happening in schools, they're invited, they can even go to the class and tell some stories to the kids. So it's organized. It's not that they just walk in, but it's organized, and the facilitator will know at this particular point the parent will come. But also the parents are encouraged to ensure that there is a feeding program in schools, because at their age, if there is no feeding program, then to keep young children in school is difficult. So there are a lot of community engagement, and also action research being done, as Tariq is saying, because it's a pilot. So we are documenting all the experiences that we are gathering through the implementation of the program. But we are also doing sort of comparison with schools which are not involved in the early childhood model that is Dubai Care is providing, because we have many models. We have government model, but also other religious organizations are providing. And in my experience, I'm not saying this because Tariq is here, but the model that they have come up with is really, really comprehensive. And the government, although we have not completed the cycle that is saying, but already we are drawing experience, and we are fitting that experience in the government model. So the people who are participating in the early childhood project model, which is called Full Circle Total or Opportunity for Children, and is actually being conducted by an NGO. But as I said, this is something that we welcome people to to partner with the government. So even if it's a non-governmental, but if we feel there's value to what they are doing, we have a lot of interaction with the government. So already we are taking some successful components, and in a way we build in the government provided the kind of model. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Michael, let's turn to you. I'm curious, from your perspective of someone who works directly with young kids every single day, you know, I'd love to hear your reflections on any of these questions, any of these comments,
Yeah.
maybe particularly the question about how to engage parents and home-based care, but anything you'd like to comment on.
Yeah, I think it's a collective responsibility to ensure that all these kids get to learn, and it's so sad sometimes you say, like, you find ECD teachers are always under looked down upon. So an ECD teacher would, for instance, be the lowest paid in a school. An ECD teacher wouldn't earn exactly the amount of money what a mathematics teacher who is teaching class 8 does. Yet he or she is a person who lays the basic foundation for that child to be able to do that math. So that is ignorance, and they need to be respected. Number two is we need to also have our ECD teachers exploring other schools, for instance, like setting up basic exchange programs. You find, for instance, in Kibera, where I work, there are so many schools coming up. Most of these schools, you find like the teachers who teach there are like high school leavers, because they don't have a job, so they'll go and teach. But what do we do, for instance, as a government, that these people who show the effort of teaching in a school are also empowered? They get to see the values, and in return, they get to find like basic, simple workshops or exchange programs that they can get more knowledge on how to teach. So I think the basic thing is respect to the teachers. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Let's go to the audience for a few more questions and comments. Okay, wow, all right. Let's take the 1, 2, 3 right here in the first row. Here, 1, 2, 3, and then we'll come to this side. Yes,
Okay.
please, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Peter Kemondo from the Ministry of Education in Kenya. One, I have appreciated the presentation, and I quote that we should make children ready for schools and schools ready for children. In Kenya, we have what we call the Kenya School Readiness Assessment Test that tries to assess whether this child who is going to a primary school is ready to attend that primary school. Unfortunately, we do not have a tool to test whether the school is ready for the child. I think that's something that I've noted. And I think we should think about that, asking ourselves, yes, the child is ready for the school, but is that school friendly enough for that child? I think that is quite important. As has been mentioned by the minister from Tanzania, we have a curriculum in place. We have ECD teachers who are there. And in Kenya today, our pre-primary education has been given by the new constitution. It is the responsibility of the devolved county governments, which is an opportunity because quite a lot of resources are now being plowed there, while the national government is handling the issue of the curriculum and policy. And right now, we are at the middle of engaging in the policy framework, and we are looking at it from an integrated, or we are doing it as a multi-sectoral approach. My question is this. We have, as a country, we are committed to giving or offering free and compulsory basic education, which starts right from pre-primary all the way to secondary, up to Form 4, or the end of the secondary school education. At primary school and secondary school, in Kenya, the government is subsidizing in what we are calling free secondary or free primary education. I would like to know from the panelists here and from the participants here, is there any country in this world that has offered free pre-primary education or that is subsidizing in pre-primary education? And if so, how is it doing? Thank you.
Indeed. Urvashi.
Good afternoon. My name is Urvashi Sani, and I'm the president of Study Hall Education Foundation India and a non-resident fellow at Brookings, the Center for Universal Education. First of all, thank you all, and thank you for the panel. And like the lady here, the frustration about early childhood development not being squarely, I know, but I feel that too. But to answer, well, partly to respond to that and to also bring something else to the table about India. In terms of political will, I'm on the advisory council for the Chief Minister in Rajasthan, and we were able to invoke political will to focus on early childhood education. We have what you call the ICDS, or the Integrated Child Development Services program, for a long time. But again, treated very marginally. You just get someone local, pay them a pittance, and it became a nutrition program, again, extremely corrupt, that didn't really happen. So in this case, what we did, a little like you were saying, Madam Minister, in Tanzania, we got they call the Anganwadi centers, which means in my backyard, sort of. So we got them included in the integrated with the schools. And we got the primary school teachers to train the Anganwadi worker regularly, to oversee the centers, and we have seen a huge fillip. More importantly, these are all government schools which cater to the very poor. The parents are delighted that they have what they call nursery schools, which they know that middle-class children get and their children don't get. And also, what it's doing is that it has increased the enrollment. Because when you enroll them at 3 or 2, they're going to stay forever. So we've done that, and what it's also done, once we started doing that, then the other centers, the standalone centers, also had a greater focus on education. And they were trained, now they're being trained for early childhood education and moving to becoming not just nutrition centers, but development centers. So my point is that there are governments, and
so
these are free.
In India, yes, it's free in India.
They are free.
So she answers the question.
My point is that, yeah, I know. And because they've been integrated and made part of the school system. So there was already some money going to that, very little. And now when they become part of the school system, that money has almost become amplified, because now the school teachers are taking care of the early childhood and helping to regularly train the Anganwadi workers who had very minimal training.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right here, right behind.
Hello, my name is Doreen, and I'm from Tanzania, so I'm particularly delighted to see you, Professor Ndajaliko, there. Thank you. My question is, I was just in rural Tanzania this week on Monday, visiting some schools there in villages, and you find 12-year-olds in pre-primary in a pre-primary program, and they're just learning ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, and this is quite late. And like you said, Minister, that there's teacher shortages. This is something we still have to figure out, train more teachers. But my question is, what are we doing now to fill this gap? Because we cannot wait. Time is not on our side. This must have happened like under 5 years old, and now they're 12. It's really late. So what are we doing now to fill in? Because I know there are so many tools and resources that could be adapted for schools while we are training teachers. So I'm from Ubongo. I'm sure you know that. And we create edu cartoons that teach ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. Are there any efforts to adapt content like this for schools so that it can be made available while we train teachers, instead of just letting kids grow up and learn much later, and when it's too late and much harder for them to grasp? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the back over here. There's one at the very back, one in the middle, and one right, the gentleman right in front. And then we will, if you could be very brief, and then just one, we'll turn back to the panel, just one final sentence, one final thought, reflection to sum up from each of you. Thank you. Yes, please, do introduce yourself.
My name's Sonia Giza. I'm with an organization called Innovation Edge in South Africa. I wanted to come back to the issue of systems for scale, because I think we spend a lot of time speaking about and showcasing individual projects, which are important, but actually we need to put more focus on systems for scale. So the work we've been doing in South Africa looks extensively at how we can use innovation, the latest technologies, how we can draw on how health sector, for example, how health sector has advanced globally, to improve systems to scale up ECD services. Things like better data, creating more demand, creating good administrative systems, financing human resources. So my question to the panel is, you've established this global task team that's looking at this. How do we from the Global South engage in this task team to inform systems for scale, rather than simply showcasing individual projects?
Okay, great question on scaling right here. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Ade. I'm from Nigeria. I work at the foundation focused on education in Nigeria. I have a comment and sort of a question, which is related to systems for scale. We support ECCD amongst our program in Nigeria. However, there's an issue in Nigeria with regards to the policy was set up in 2004. So we have a policy, piece of paper. Years down the line, we have schools in Nigeria that don't have, well, the classes are there, but then the equipment isn't there, so there's no quality across all these schools. So yes, you have ECCD classes, but then nothing being taught really. You have carers and parents dropping off their children on one hand. On the other hand, what you also have is 180 million Nigerians. So when I hear about countries that are 4 million people or 12 million people, that's sometimes either a local government or a state in Nigeria, and the education is decentralized. And in this case, sometimes working at the national level and working your way down to the local level will take a lot of time. So it's easier, and this is a comment, so it's easier to come into Nigeria, know the policy exists, and start working with individual state governments if you're a large donor. Because in Lagos State, for instance, you have 20 million odd people, and you have the largest number of early child care or children out of school at that level as well. But the issue also is, and this is also a question related to the systems of scale, is how do we ensure that what's best practice across the world actually gets transferred in such a way that it's adapted in a context like mine?
Thank you very much. Final question, and then we will have one closing thought from each panelist.
Okay. Toby Eccles from Social Finance United Kingdom. I guess when we've looked at ECD around the world, I'll just make 2 or 3 observations and then ask for precedents. The first is that it fits so elegantly and therefore awfully between education and health. And therefore, I'm wondering whether there are any precedents of countries that have managed to get those 2 budgets working together, because we typically find that very difficult. It's also difficult because it works through very small organizations, nurseries and similar. Government can deal with large organizations. Hospitals are easier than schools. So nurseries are really tricky. So again, looking for precedents of working successfully, building markets of small organizations. And then lastly, and I think the third reason why this is very challenging, is it's where the relationship between government and parents is at its subtlest, because it's actually about empowering and supporting parents to be more effective, rather than taking over that role and slowly taking parents' strengths and power away. So again, I'm interested in precedents of where that has been elegantly managed. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. So you won't be able to answer all these questions, and that's fine, because actually the audience has a rich number of experience, just as the panelists, and it's about sparking discussion. So I'm going to pick randomly. Minister, can you start just one final thought, one sentence of, you can answer one question or one final thought about early childhood to close.
Well, I think I would like to answer that because it's quite interesting for a 12-year-old child to be in pre-primary school. But what I want to say, in Tanzania, we have primary education, but also we have what we call complementary basic education for children who are already past the school age, but they are not in school. because you are talking about no child should be left behind. So even them, even if they are 16, we organize classrooms. So I guess what she has seen is part of what we call complementary basic education. So my final word is that as government, we are committed, but we are finding a lot of challenges in early childhood education, and I'll call all the partners to continue working together with governments, because it needs collaborative effort for early childhood to succeed. Strong community involvement, strong partnership with non-government organizations and institutions which are experienced because to provide early childhood education. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Minister Padel, you want to also have just one sentence, one final thought to leave us?
Thank you very much. There is 3 types of ECD classes in Nepal. One is government ECD, other is community-based ECD, and some is belong to private sector also. 30,000 of ECD classes belong to public sector. About 3,000 belong to community sector, and less than 1,000 belong to private sector also. All the community sector and government sector ECD has compulsory and free to provide by government, and we proud that the 75% above teachers in ECD classes is female. Then female take care children's, then playing, by nutrition and health also. This is our practice. This is good practices recognized as Nepal and all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, what's your final sentence?
To me, I would say, I would challenge everyone, why don't we think of working directly with these based institutions, just like she said? Different areas have different challenges, and it's so hard for central government to look into all the institutions at once. So if you know of something you want to do, let's do it directly with those institutions, and let's find ways of also challenging our teachers towards creativity, because I believe learning is not just about exams. I never passed my high school exam, but it's about the right to play and the right to express yourself. We have children with diverse strengths, and they are not all equal, and we need to find ways of understanding them at a very early age. Thank you.
Thank you. Fabulous. One sentence right there. One sentence, Tarek.
Maybe less.
Okay, one word.
Each one of us, maybe I'll answer your question. Each one of us has a mission. Each one of us has a role on this planet, let's say. We will do our bit to invest in research, extract evidence to see what models would work with governments. But then the government has another role to do. They look at different kind of models, and they look at different kind of organizations which are supporting their country. The community has a role. The parents have a role. And each one of us has a role. This is going to take some time. As I mentioned earlier, it's just a few years back, education got the limelight to get this big attention in the world. What is it, Julia? 1 or 2% of global funding in humanitarian goes towards education? Yeah?
It's been going
It's
backwards, yeah.
2%? It's nothing. 2% of global funding is going towards education. But now, as I mentioned, there are global leaders who are pushing for this. We are all doing our jobs. I always say I'm a small ant in this whole world. I have a big voice, though, but a small ant, and I'll do my bit also.
Thank you, Tarek. Julia, closing final thoughts for our panel.
Sure. I just wanted to pick up the systems at scale question. because that is, quintessentially what we try to do at GPE. We think we know a lot about education systems at scale because that's what we've been doing over these years. We're trying to get better at the knowledge and innovation exchange so that something that's working somewhere can be rapidly diffused and deployed by other nations. We're trying to do that in the schooling sector through what we call our knowledge and innovation exchange. We are more now working in this area of early childhood education and development. And I would say if you think you've got an insight about how to work in this area and to work at scale, that's exactly the information we're trying to capture through the Better Early Learning at Scale initiative. And I can certainly assure you, we're an organisation that is genuinely a partnership, almost 90 countries, developing country partners. They are the drivers of defining the thirst for knowledge, and they have said that they want to learn more about early childhood at scale. So now's the right time to be engaging with us as we work in this process with Dubai Cares to better learn how we can get systems to respond at scale to the early learning needs of children.
All right, join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.